Welcome, everyone, to the Foremost Opportunities in Real Estate podcast. I'm here today with Ben Singer. He is a partner at SR Law, and Ben has been a terrific proponent of multiplex condominium units. Ben has been helping our clients, we've been helping his clients on a number of multiplex condominium units in East York, Yonge and Finch, The Junction, and Forest Hill. Thank you, Ben, for coming in. I really appreciate you spending the time to be with us today.
Of course, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Ben, tell us about yourself and tell us about what you do at SR Law.
I'm Ben Singer. I'm a partner at Schneider Ruggiero, Spencer Melbourne. As a firm, we help real estate developers, investors, lenders go through their whole product life cycle and make sure that they're actually making money in real estate the way that they want to. And my practice really focuses on the development side. So I work with developers of condominiums, of subdivisions, properties of all sorts, get through whatever their process is, and make sure at the end of the day, there's a happy client with keys in hand, taking possession of a new home, whether it's a rental or a condo. But where we've really niched down is in the small infill multiplex developments, and within those, the condominium space. I think most Canadians want to own a home, and the way that they're going to be able to own homes in the future is within multi-residential buildings. Our cities are only going to be able to grow so big without traffic becoming a massive problem. So if we do want to add density within existing cities, on existing transit lines, near work, near schools, near parks, the only way to do that is by adding units within a given site. And within those contexts, within those kind of sites, condominium is how we're going to split up those units.
I completely agree. Okay, so if I wanted to live with a couple of my friends, or if I wanted to build something for my children, so I could buy a site, I hire an HRCA licensed builder, I hire an architect, and I want to build a multiplex and register as a condominium, what would I have to do from a legal standpoint, or what considerations from a legal standpoint should I make for a multiplex condo versus just a purposeful rental?
So the first thing you want to take a look at is whether or not you're going to end up being a vendor for HCRA's purpose. HCRA is the Home Construction Regulatory Authority. They regulate the sale of new homes, as well as Tarion, which is the Tarion Warrant Corporation, and they warrant those new homes and the deposits for any sales of the new homes. Looking at whether or not you fall under the definition of a vendor is pretty crucial. Even if you're working with an HCRA licensed builder, they still want to know that somebody selling new homes into the market is somebody who's qualified, somebody who meets their qualifications for expertise, who's going to act professionally and deal with buyers in an appropriate way. So looking at your project on an individual basis, where you need to go with that, because they do have different definitions what constitutes a new home than what might be intuitive. So that's the first place where you're probably working with a lawyer, is to figure out, do I fall under this? And can I find maybe an exception if you don't want to work within the regulatory system? Or do you want to, even if you wouldn't necessarily have originally fallen under the definition, do you want to be able to offer that Tarion back warranty, which means you are falling within the system, which means you do have to be a vendor. We actually had a client, you and I together, this happened to them. They were working on a project where they retained a significant portion of the foundation and some walls for the exterior. And under HCRA and Tarion's definition, that wasn't going to be resulting in new homes, even though each individual unit was going to be a brand new home for people to use. So we had the conversations with Tarion that were necessary, and they ended up deciding that they would warrant it. So now this is an occupied multiplex condo. All 4 units are warranted with Tarion, meaning that buyers have the security of knowledge that if anything goes wrong within the warranty period, that it's going to be taken care of, whether it's by the builder directly or by Tarion.
It's funny, some builders that are doing renovations also use their own warranty. I guess you're running into definitions with what is eligible for a Tarion warranty versus not, with a renovation versus non-renovation. How do you make the distinction between, is this a minor renovation, therefore not applicable to Tarion, or an extensive renovation and a Tarion is applicable?
So the general rule is, if it's residential renos, it's not going to be applicable. Now you can argue with Tarion over that and speak to them about percentages of work, how much of the unit itself versus, say, the foundations and the structural components are new versus reused. But at the end of the day, it comes down to Tarion's discretion. So it's not going to be your choice, it's going to be Tarion's. but you can obviously make arguments one way or the other. Where things really come in is, yes, builders can offer their own warranties. And as long as it's a big established builder, that warranty has a lot of value. If you're new to the market, that warranty may not be worth much to people because they don't know you, they don't know your reputation yet. You'll build a reputation over time, but for your first project, I do think having that reputation of Tarion as being the government-backed warranty corporation backing your project is a real big market advantage.
I agree. I think if with a Tarion warranty, there's less of a risk premium there because you're dealing with a known commodity. So I think, and I guess it's a great point if you do a renovation, it's great to check with Tarion and say, okay, would you be willing to offer a warranty on it based on the renovation? And you touched on an HRCA licensed vendor. Would it be possible to hire a licensed vendor? If you have a builder that specializes in building, do you think it would be possible to hire a HRC licensed vendor that specializes in selling homes? Or do you think it'd be easier just to go through the courses and become a vendor yourself rather than hiring an outside company?
This is an interesting question. I think it really comes down to what your economic model for your build is. If you're looking to, say, flip land into a system where it's being developed into multiplex condos, then it's less so hiring an HCRA licensed vendor and more about finding one who's going to take the project off your hands. At the end of the day, the person selling is really the person who's responsible to the buyer for the end product. So if that's going to be you, then I think you want to be licensed. If that's going to be someone else that you sell to, then effectively that's how it works. And I think one of the other elements is, are you hiring? Are you connecting with? Or are you partnering? Because it is very possible to partner with someone who has the qualifications, who meets the experience level that HCRA is looking for, bring them into your builds, bring them into your company, and work with them together collaboratively to make sure that what's being offered to the market is something that most of the buyers are going.
Okay, so I have my multiplex plans, my building permit. So we have our Tarion considerations taken care of. What's the next step aside from Tarion?
So I think that the next real step, and maybe even taking a step back, is running the numbers on whether this is even a good idea in the first place. So because of the new HST changes, as long as your price point is right, so with the purposeful rental rebate, you are looking at a full rebate of HST. With these new home sales rebates, you're looking at a less generous rebate, up to $1 million, which is fantastic. Over $1 million for first-time home buyers, which is it's being offered for a longer period of time, but it starts declining to $1.5 million in purchase price. And for the general public, for this very temporary, so 1 year HST holiday plan, and we don't have any legislation yet, unfortunately, but the plan is that it will stay stable from 1 million to 1.5. So you're looking at $130,000 rebate, whatever the HST is, and then it declines between 1.5 and 1.85. Figuring out your pro forma here gets really important because you have to know your sales numbers, but also your input costs. And with a condo development, you're generally looking at a few input costs that you would be looking at. So your legal fees on acquisition on mortgage stay more or less the same, but you are looking at developing a disclosure package and purchase agreement package for sales, as well as lawyer services for actually registering the condo and transitioning over from a property that you own to a property that's now being managed by a corporation and owned by 4, 6, 10 homeowners, each possessing their own unit. So you're looking at hiring a lawyer, a surveyor to map everything out, a planner to actually move your applications through the city, a consulting property manager. So even if the property is going to end up being self-managed, for your sale process, you do want a consulting property manager to make sure that you've got all your proper contracts in place, setting up even the condo corporation's bank account, insurance, things like that are really important for the function of the condo corp, making sure that you have a licensed condominium manager. So condo property managers do have to be specially licensed. Make sure you have one on your team. Is the other crucial, and maybe even going back, the most important, I'm going to say, and no offense, not the lender, the realtor, the person who's actually going to sell these into the market. They're going to be really important in the design phase, in the condominium planning phase, and in the end sales phase, because you need someone in your process speaking for the end buyer. You're going to be doing a lot of predictive work because a lot of these properties, we're not selling them off paper, we're building and then selling.
Right.
So the predictive work of what is going to move in the market is mostly being done by a realtor. because at the end of the day, they're the ones who have to move it. So making sure that they have a firm grasp and some element of control over the project, being able to suggest those little things that might move the property a little bit better. I'll give you one example. One of the elements of condominium disclosure, very simple decision. Are pets allowed? And you can get into the details of big dogs, little dogs. What about cats? What about snakes? Don't permit snakes. Don't do it. But whether or not you're pet friendly or a sort of pet prohibited building, that's a big question for sales because people who love their pets are not going to abandon them. You're not going to be able to sell to them if you ban pets. Meanwhile, people with allergies, sensitivities, small children who have maybe a fear of dogs, they're not going to buy from you if pets are permitted. So really in this sort of new market of end users really narrowing in on what the property is and what they're going to be allowed to do, decisions like that won't necessarily affect the build at all, but will affect how people buy. This is a decision that does need to be made in advance because the default rules of the condominium are set by the developer. So this is all to say the realtor is one of the most important parts of the team. And I'm not just saying that to fluff my friends who are realtors.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I've been talking to some builder developers who are quite new to this. I feel like it's a bit of a gold rush where you have a lot of very sophisticated people with investment banking or REIT backgrounds, newer people that are seeing a quick payday. Some people were building a multiplex to register as condominiums and sell, but they were building it in an area where you essentially need a parking space. Like the public transit is not good enough in those areas to have a 2,000 square foot house and have a nice lifestyle. There's no street parking in the area. So you can't park overnight without getting a ticket night after night. So they're selling 5 condominiums without a parking space in an area that's not appropriate for street parking. I guess if those individuals before investing $3 million in a project were to consult with a realtor, they would have realized, holy smokes, I can't sell a condominium in this area without a dedicated parking space. So I'm sure there's a lot of small intricacies in addition to the parking spot, but you made an excellent point about the realtors and how important it is to actually have a marketable product at the end of the day.
Parking is actually the perfect example. Maybe I went too quick to pets, the big P's. But yeah, the project as a whole, our observation of the market is that a project without parking is generally going to be more viable as rental than as condo because people are looking much further down the road when they're buying condo. When they're buying a home for their family or for the family they hope to have, they're looking at how's my lifestyle going to work? So not just, is this a nice unit on the inside, but how am I going to interact with work, with potential schools for kids, daycares, parks, all of those amenities that people really need. And for a lot of people, the way they get to work, daycare, school, that's going to be by car. So I think where these projects are really going to be successful, because parking is a huge problem, they'll be successful in areas where parking isn't such a big deal. So really close to rapid transit is one of the elements of the site that's, I think, going to make it really good for condo because people don't necessarily need that car. And the people who are buying these units aren't necessarily going to build their lifestyle around having a car, but they will build their lifestyle around quick access to rapid transit. So if you're looking at a site, looking at what's going to be good for people to be able to move around and live their lives, that's a key element of the site. It's not just what's physically on site, but what's in the neighborhood. What are the amenities that the physical location offers you to be able to then turn around and market as a for sale unit?
I find it so interesting. I think we're in the early days of this multiplex development phase. I think people are trying out various models to see what works. I've seen some interesting models of multiplexes in the suburbs on 50, 60, 70-foot lots that incorporate garage parking, and they do it quite well. So I'm not sure. I guess the jury's out if those would be feasible or if it makes sense to give up some of your buildable or leasable square footage to accommodate cars in a garage. But I feel like it's going to happen. I feel like the city will be more reasonable with their softscape, maybe allow you to park on permeable pavers between a garden suite and a house, maybe allow reverse slope driveway or do it through the community of adjustment process. I feel like if you indemnify the city of Toronto against any liability from flooding as a result of the reverse slope driveway, I feel like they would accept it. So I think there's ways. I think the city's always announcing new programs. They're actually listening to builders and developers. So I feel like in 10 years, we'll have much more reasonable housing stock when it comes to multiplexes.
If we're talking about the 10-year horizon, I think parking might not be an issue for other reasons. I don't know if you've been in a self-driving car lately. They're pretty good. So 10 years down the road, maybe we're just looking at people warehousing their cars down the street and you call it to your house. You don't necessarily need on-site parking. But let's assume that we do. I'm actually getting a little bit less optimistic about the city. Again, you and I have a project that is using the reverse slope driveway. So effectively, it's a corner lot. And the way parking is going to work is you enter the parking lot, dip down below the structure on one edge of the property, and then exit on the other. So it's a one-way flow. And parking's in this underground garage. It's a good use of space. The basement isn't that valuable compared to having parking for the units. The city, in their most recent multiplex bylaw, they giveth with one hand and taketh with the other. So we got enhanced permissions in some warrants, we got higher heights, but we lost reverse slope driveways. So on that front, it does get difficult to follow all the policy challenges and to figure out the solution. So I think the durable solutions are the best ones. And at least for multiplex condos, the most durable solution is locating in a neighborhood where parking becomes as moot as possible. So whether that means being super close to rapid transit, close to car sharing parking lots, the different models that are offered where you have a subscription and you're sharing a car that's located somewhere very close, or even some of them have permissions to work on street. So those kind of solutions that obviate the need for just the family car, I think are the more durable solutions that are going to just be better for the product, because being at the whim of city policy, that's rough. That's rough. I don't like it.
I was at the housing council meeting when they were adopting the new changes, and one of the changes was removing the reverse slope driveway from the multiplex legislation. And I was speaking out against removing the reverse slope driveway, and some of the councillors came up to me afterwards. He said how important it was because they didn't want the city of Toronto being liable for flooding, and they were concerned that if someone were to appeal the reverse slope driveway aspect, they'd appeal the entire sixplex as of right throughout the city of Toronto. So we're just very adamant. The indication was go to the committee of adjustments, get something, and then indemnify the city against risk for the reverse slope driveway. But it has costs, it has risks. So I love to pick a planner's brain on getting a minor variance for a reverse slope driveway, but they're all over the city. If they're engineered correctly, I don't see an issue with it. But yeah, you're right. I'm hoping self-driving cars bridge the gap in a little bit. So you don't have to own a car. You just call it an Uber style car will come, you can go wherever you want. And going back to the legal fees, I feel like if you're building a condo that's 8,000, 7,000, 9,000, 10,000 square feet, I like to think of these multiplexes on a cost per leasable square foot or cost per buildable, cost per saleable. And if you look at the legal fees divided by the square foot, it's actually quite reasonable. So I don't think it's cost prohibitive registering these as condominiums because you might pay an extra $12 a square foot, $15 a square foot to register as a condominium to do all the extra legal and surveying work, but the value would increase from what is it, 600 a square foot as a rental project to maybe 700 or 800 once the market starts accepting these. So I'm quite optimistic on the value. And also, multiplex, we're not sure what the value of purpose-built rental multiplexes are because they're not really sold right now. So there's some estimates of a cap rate of 4.25 or cap rate of 4.5%, but with no trades, that's untested. So if the true value isn't a 4.5 cap, it's a 5.5 cap. A lot of these multiplex projects are in trouble; they don't pencil. So everything's being built to be refinanced at CMHC. I think a safer bet would be to have both, kind of hedge your bet, some kind of multiplex condominiums to sell, some to refinance with CMHC in order to benefit from future rent acceleration in the future. I guess hopefully your rent's more than the expenses in 5 to 10 years. I feel like that's a longer term play, but if you don't want to wait 5 to 10 years for a major payday for a rental building, the immediate kind of benefit is doing a multiplex to sell. And to me, it's a luxury product. I find it if you're building the most desirable locations in the city, you're willing to work in a more non-conventional housing type. So Trinity Bellwoods, Forest Hill. I haven't seen one in Rosedale yet, but I think that would be terrific if we could get one in Rosedale and the more desirable areas. But I feel like as the topology expands and as the city becomes more reasonable, you'll get to see some of the outer edges where you have larger lots that are more reasonably priced that can accommodate 4 more homes per lot.
Yeah, I think the luxury market, or at least semi-luxury market, the luxury market, I think, is always going to value privacy pretty highly. But people who really value living in this very specific neighborhood, this is going to be the product type that is going to work because new entrants into a neighborhood, generally in Toronto, are faced with a choice. A rundown property that needs full renos and a land premium that is excessively high because guess what? They're not making any more land. They're not making any more land in Rosedale. They're not making any more land at Bathurst and Eglinton. These neighborhoods that people really want to live in, there's only the lots are what they are. So the only way that people are going to be able to enter these neighborhoods is through multiplexes because they're also probably within the interior streets. I don't think that's the right format for the neighborhood. And I don't think it'll get the best premium. I think what we'll get the best premium is a home that feels like a home that happens to be connected to other homes that feel like homes. So at the end of the day, this kind of development, I think, is going to work very well in higher end neighborhoods where people do want to enter, they want to bring in and raise their families. It's a little bit trickier on those edge neighborhoods because of all of the city rules around parking and for neighborhoods where you really can't access the rest of the city without a car. So I think we're going to see the intensification first in areas that demand the most intensification and see it trickle out from the edges. That's how we're seeing all multiplex development right now.
Absolutely.
And I think that the one thing that's really going to change, especially with these HST changes, is that more and more of these projects are going to look like they make sense as condo developments. And frankly, I do think that's more sustainable because as a condo, you're subject to the market of people who actually want to use this product. So if you aren't able to sell something, it's going to sit vacant and your project doesn't quite work out. So a lot of work goes in advance to making sure what you're building is actually something that's going to be absorbed. On the purposeful rental side, I think because we have so much government intervention, market signals are a little bit damp. So you don't necessarily build what the market is directly demanding. You build to the specifications of CMHC. So you're ending up building maybe smaller units than the market would otherwise want, but to hit your affordability criteria with CMHC, you have to. So you end up with a product, and again, in a multiplex or in a small apartment building, it's very difficult to change once you've done it. It's very difficult to change the unit layout, the unit setup. So building for the market, I think, is the more sustainable option. And building for condominiums, building for a market, there's no intervention here. We really are talking about end users either liking your product or not.
That's brilliant. It's funny. A lot of people right now see changes where they're making energy efficiency less of a factor. You get less points for energy efficiency or the requirements are higher. You have to put solar panels on your roof, for example, to get the points needed for the longer amortization. So I find a lot of builders are shying away from that and they're going to build for affordability. So they're going to build many 1,200 square foot units to cater to what the market wants, 3-bedroom accommodation. And they'll put one kind of small 400 square foot apartment in the basement. But I think it'll make it less attractive for a buyer if the amortization is not a concern. Yeah, I should manipulate the market that way. So making the homes less attractive to end users. I never thought about that point, but it's an excellent point.
Fundamentally, if you're building in a family neighborhood, a 400 square foot unit, there are single people who want or need to live in a family neighborhood for whatever reason. But that 400 square foot unit is not going to be good for a family with 2 kids, maybe a dog running around. Like, it's just not enough room. So those 400 square feet maybe would be better off divided up among the 4 other units in the building. And each one gets a small basement for storage, something where the value is actually added versus the market. And you bring up the solar panels because there is actually a lot of incentive in the condo space and in the multiplex space to move into renewable energy and alternatives to just drawing on hydro, in part to keep your common expenses as low as possible, and in part because Toronto Hydro has not been the most responsive when it comes to upgrading power to sites. So anything that builders can do to reduce power consumption from the grid, so whether that's switching to gas appliances or implementing solar panels, really anything you can do to get off of electricity, which is ironic given other environmental goals, but it really can benefit the end user a lot by bringing down their own monthly expenses and also benefit the bill. Like the capex of improving power to the site can be prohibitively expensive. Anybody listening, don't have a specific pitch for a solar panel company, but the principle, love it. Look into it.
We're in housing crisis. The homes are not affordable. So I get groups of individuals that try to get together as investors. So what advice would you have to two or three individuals that want to hire a builder? They maybe have 6 kids each. They want to give each kid a unit that's in a multiplex condominium unit. They hire a builder, they have a piece of land, maybe they do a big purchase sale and kind of avoid to take advantage of the HST tax credit. What advice would you have to individuals with looking to live together or live in a communal building, but condominiumized to be easier to sell at the end of the day?
Yeah. So I think the first thing to look at is what the time horizon is. The main reason why you would condo in this situation, so you're working with friends, you're working with family, the main reason is individual mortgages. So if you're looking at a relatively long time horizon, what might make sense is build, co-own, all get the mortgage together and work on the condominium aspect a little bit later. Condominiumization can be thought of as capex. It's an improvement not to the physical structure, to the legal structure of the building. And spreading out your capex over time is potentially financially helpful. But it does decrease, if you delay condominium registration, it does decrease fungibility, your ability to sell off a unit or two or remortgage individually a unit or two or all of them at once, because there is no unit to separately mortgage, to separately sell. The only option you have is work with the building as a whole. So I think the first thing is to look at your timeline and look at how you are interacting as friends, as family. And if you are able to co-own at the outset for the first few years and then work on condominium later, that's fantastic. If that doesn't seem realistic, if you want the option upfront from day one to get separate mortgages, say separate financial backgrounds, then you go right to lawyer, surveyor, planner, and condominium manager. Again, even if you're going to manage yourself, you need the advice on how to set things up. And there are plenty of very good condominium managers who are willing to do that consultation work for you. Just making sure that the setup is fair and appropriate. Co-ownership agreements can be heavily customized. The condo option is a little bit less. You are setting up in advance, say what the costs are and aren't, and then the Condo Act doesn't quite take over, but to some extent it takes over and dictates how the relationship is going to work, what the remedies are if somebody doesn't pay. You have co-ownership, somebody's not paying their fair share. You're going to court, you're going to mediation, you're going here, there, whatever. Condo's very simple. Slap a lien on their property. So you do have, I think, a much almost easier time with the relationship with condo because the remedies are there, the process is there, and it's all set out versus the emotional difficulty of suing your friends. It's very difficult.
Other groups are trying a hybrid approach. So they're building multiplexes, they're renting them out, but they're not going through the expense of CMHC financing because the insurance premiums can be quite substantial. So their intention is to rent them out for a number of years and eventually condominiumize and sell them. What advice would you have to somebody that is looking to rent and then condominiumize in a few years?
So there are a few red flags there. The first is building size. If you're 6 units and above, you fall under the conversion bylaw for the City of Toronto, and most other cities have similar bylaws. So they may have different thresholds. Keep that in mind if we're outside of the Toronto market. But in Toronto, if you're 6 units and over, it's very much a discretionary process by the city. And my understanding right now is that they're not inclined to permit this because our rental vacancy rate is still too low over time. So it's gone above that 3% threshold that the bylaw anticipates potentially permitting, but that has to go on for 4 years. And we just hit the first year of 3% vacancy. The size really matters. If you are 6 or over, you do need to make the decision effectively in advance or put yourself at the mercy of the city. The other element to consider is that the Residential Tenancies Act grants tenants who are in a building that is converted special rights that they wouldn't have if they came into an already existing condo. So they have a right of first refusal and a right of occupancy. Right of first refusal effectively means anybody putting in an offer, that offer needs to be conditional in favor of the seller, which usually we're talking about buyer conditions for inspection, that kind of thing. No, we're talking about a conditional option in favor of the vendor. So the vendor has time, and this is the tenant of the unit has 3 days. So the owner probably wants about 4 days to be able to go to their tenant and say, here's the offer I have on hand. Do you want to match it or not? And that tenant has the absolute right to match it. And if they do, the first purchase agreement's dead, tenant's buying, which makes it a little bit less marketable because if I'm a buyer in the market, why do I want to lock myself up for 3 to 4 days while I'm waiting for somebody else to make a decision? The other element is they have a right of perpetual occupancy, meaning ordinarily, if I buy a home that's occupied by a tenant, can initiate proceedings to get that tenant out. And so I can live in that home. Not so with a conversion condo where the tenant has been occupying during conversion. They have the right to stay. So effectively, if I found the perfect family home, happens to be tenanted, gets turned into a condo while that person is in there, that tenant, I can buy that unit and that tenant can simply say, no, I'm staying as long as I want.
Yeah. And you can't share them is it a 911 if you're going to use it as your own principal residence?
I think you're thinking of the car and No, so that's exactly what the Residential Tenancies Act eliminates.
How?
They eliminate the right to evict for personal occupancy. So even if they wouldn't have ever had that, it doesn't matter. So if this was a 4-unit building where as the owner of all 4 units, I could have done a personal eviction because I want all 4 units for myself. I turn that into a condo, that right goes away. So it really is something to consider whether you want to do this up front or not, because if you're not doing it up front, practically speaking, in order to maximize sale value, you are probably waiting out the current branch tenants. And here's the problem. If you build something that's great for sale, that people are going to want to stay in for a long time, your tenants are going to want to stay in a long time. And for a rental building, that's fantastic. You don't have to deal with turnover. You don't have to deal with realtor fees on the releasing. But if the plan is to sell and you're stuck with the tenant, it's a problem. So I do think there's a bit of a bifurcation. To an extent, have to decide, am I building for rental? Am I building for ownership? And you optimize for those 2 scenarios. Because really, even build structure, if you're optimizing for rental and for CMHC, you might be building these smaller units that wouldn't do well on the sale. If you're optimizing for ownership, those smaller units probably have to go, either be combined with other units or simply you design the building around these factors. With a rental building where the landlord is really responsible for the whole building, it's less of a concern, I think, to have shared amenities, shared common expenses that say an interior hallway that needs to be cleaned by the landlord. If you are building for condo, that shared interior space will need to be cleaned, it'll need to be lit, and it'll all be a condo expense. Meaning the common expenses that a buyer is going to see will be a little bit higher than they otherwise would be if there was no shared space. Meaning the optimal thing to do to get your headline common expenses down as low as possible will be to eliminate that space. A bit hard to do after the fact. Really, in the design process, even almost the same or very similar units, there are ways to optimize for condo that aren't necessarily optimized for purposeful rent. And once you build, you're effectively locked in. You can always change things around with the building you own, but only so much.
Interesting. And I hear so much about the strata process in Vancouver. It seems like a lot of the multiplexes built in Vancouver are built for sale versus to refinance with CMHC. It seems the numbers work a lot better in Vancouver. It's an accepted form of housing. If you were premier, what would you change about the condominium process to make it more similar to the strata process in Vancouver?
So I don't think that actually changed much. I've looked at the strata process in Vancouver, and it's reasonably similar. There are a few structural differences. One is that the land there is all in this, or almost all in Vancouver, in a status that's essentially the equivalent of what we call here land titles absolute. Effectively meaning there's no such thing as a claim on land titles absolute for adverse possession. That's when a neighbor has moved their fence and they take part of your land, or possessory easements. That's where somebody's been using a part of your land for, say, a purpose like walking through as a shortcut for a significant period of time. And then they're able to effectively claim that as a legal right in Ontario, we have a process where we effectively eliminate those. That adds to your condominium cost because it has to be done in advance. In Vancouver, the land is already in that upgraded status, so you don't have to deal with that. What we're looking at here is a few process differences, but I think at the end of the day, our condo process is a little bit more expensive, but it results in a condo structure that I think lessens disputes and on the long term means that disputes get worked out in a much more orderly fashion. I see news from Vancouver all the time about 2 or 3 unit condos where the owners are loggerheads and the only way to resolve it is court. Our process results in condos where that doesn't really happen. So I wouldn't actually change the process. What I would say is that there's two big reasons why I think Vancouver has far more multiplex ownership than we do. The first is culture. I think they're used to it. It's a known entity. And this is what I think when you're used to doing something, it's what you do. So I think in Toronto, one thing we could do is experiment more. We're a very conservative city. Politics aside, very conservative. We like to do things the way we've done them. In the past, it was towers or condo. I think we do need to experiment more. I think the other element is Vancouver has a much bigger problem with inflated land prices. And so if you're dealing with, say, $1 million to $1.5 million lots here, the land premium being divided up is not as big as dealing with a $3, $4, $5 million lot. So the same property that is being divided up, the land premium, say a 4-unit, you paid 1.2 for the land, that's a $300,000 land premium. Maybe not so much to be so attractive for a builder to turn that into a condo and sell off that land premium. But on a $4 million lot, it almost means rental is impossible because how do you recoup that from a renter? Land is really access to an area. The market price for land is $4 million. You can put a fourplex on that and say, actually, to live in this area, instead of paying $4 million, you only pay $1 million plus the cost of the building. That's extraordinarily attractive. That's essentially $3 million discount access.
Brilliant. That's a great way to look at it, actually.
That, I think, at the end of the day is where the difference is coming from. And I think looking at it from that perspective can open up a lot more opportunities in Toronto because it really comes down to land is expensive, much more expensive there than it is here, but land is expensive. And if we're looking at it from the perspective of how do we open up access to as many communities as possible, reasonable cost to people who are working hard and trying to make ends meet, I think the condo model ends up looking a lot more attractive.
I completely agree. I think it's kind of early days in Toronto. It's been happening for the past 12 years, at a small scale. I know Blue Line construction we've been working with Evan Sask and Blue Line for the past 12 years, and he pioneered it. Now there's other builders getting into the space. So it's early days for the multiplex condo unit. As more of them are built, it become a more mainstream part of our housing stock and kind of be an acceleration phase as it becomes more adopted in the market. As people see that this work, more people will adopt it. As land values become, I guess, higher, more out of reach, it will accelerate the adoption. So I'm quite optimistic, and I appreciate your advocate for the multiplex condominium units in the city of Toronto. You've been outspoken. You've been so generous with your time coming on this podcast today, really getting the word out. So thank you for your advocacy, and I really appreciate you coming in today, Ben.
Look, thanks, Matt. And I think not to toot your horn so much, but if I put words behind it, foremost is putting money behind these projects. And words are great, but money gets housing built. So
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, it's great to be part of the dream team. We have great builders, great lawyers, great lenders, and then we'll get this asset class off the ground, and we'll kind of see more multiplex condominiums built in the city of Toronto.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much, Ben. We appreciate it.